There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Promethean Action's live question and answer show. We do this show every Thursday. My name is Adam Sturman. I am a producer here with Promethean Action, and I'm joined with the lovely Susan Kokinda and Barbara Boyd from Promethean Action and Promethean PAC. All right, today's show is entitled JPMorgan's $1.5 trillion versus Trump's national security strategy. I think you guys have seen the article, probably have seen the news about JPMorgan, and it's been making the news in all the financial press. They have this $1.5 trillion, I don't even know what to call it yet, alliance, funding alliance, plus some advisory board to go along with it. So I think it's kind of a two-part thing. You have the funding component, and then you have this advisory board that's surrounding it. And it's very interesting. I think this is a process that started months ago, but it's coming back into the public eye again. And so we're going to be talking about why this could possibly be coming into focus right now, right as Trump has just launched his new national security strategy, and what all of this means for 2028 in next presidential election. So as we get warmed up here, why don't you as you come in, please just drop us a like. That helps the video a lot, especially when we're starting off, to get those likes. And let us know where you're from. And then we're going to jump right into some opening remarks here from Susan and Barbara. So let's see today. Immediately I see stuff from Indianapolis, Massachusetts. Storm Lover 3 from Ohio, welcome. Hello from Northern California. Hello, Storm Lover. Thank you for joining us. Ruben Cruz, hello. Has anyone started a Promethean PAC here in New Jersey? Not a Promethean PAC or Promethean Action. So this is something we need to talk about.
If you reach out to us on our website, we'll get in touch with you and see if you have like-minded people around you.
Yeah, just reach out to us. Our email links are on our website, prometheanaction.com. Let me just spend a few more minutes here to let big hello from Brussels, Belgium. Thank you, Peter, for joining us every week. Also, our X.com supporters, thank you so much for joining us from X. I recently started an X.com profile myself. You could check it out. It's X.com at AdamSturman23. So you can give me a follow there. But thank you for all the people that follow us on X.com. We know we have huge support out there. Chicky Rogue, hello, welcome. Tim Jordan, thank you for joining us and reposting. All right, so much stuff. Inspire Peace, Northern Virginia. Thank you for joining us from Northern Virginia. Houston. All right, so let's begin with our introduction here. Susan, I think you had something you wanted to actually give a briefing on the national security strategy, because I think not a lot of people really know about the document at all or the policy yet.
That's right. And I think this is one of the most defining actions that Donald Trump has taken in both of his administrations. And I would even restate it. This is one of the most defining documents in the last 100 years. Last Thursday, the Trump administration released the national security strategy. Adam, can you share the screen just so people can see what it looks like? And we'll put links for you to get this in the chat. What the document is a complete and literal attack on globalization, transnationalism, free trade, the rules-based order, internationalism, perpetual war. At the same time, it is an explicit embrace of our founding principles as a sovereign nation committed to living in a world respectfully with other sovereign nations, and putting the question of genuine economic development at its core. We call it the American system. The Trump team doesn't put it in precisely those terms, But what they describe in this document is extraordinary because notice this says national security strategy. There is as much in this document about rebuilding the economy of the United States, reanimating our working class, middle class core with good paying jobs, and recognizing that economic development is equivalent to national security. Now, in the course of today's discussion, we're going to respond to some of the questions which people give us and show you specific sections of this document and just how extraordinary it is, how truly revolutionary it is. I will say that the outlets of the globalists, like the Council on Foreign Relations or Chatham House or the Atlantic Council, they recognize the significance of this document, and they are in a full-fledged freak out over it. And over the course of today's discussion, I think we're going to talk about how some of them are trying to respond to this either through attacks or recalibrating or other pivots to deal with the fact that this is a new world. I would assert, and some of my historian friends might come up with a different framework for this, that this is the most important restatement of American foreign policy since William McKinley, in the sense that McKinley was actually able to implement things. Trump is able to implement things. We've had other presidents who I think have stated things, but for one reason or another, in some cases assassination, they've not actually been able to implement the vision which is in this document. And in the first 11 months of his administration, Trump has already done a lot of this. So I encourage people. This is 33 pages, big type, half an hour reading. Stop doom scrolling for a half an hour. It's written in human language. It's not written in Diplo speak or all this other kind of garbage. It's actually written for you. It's written to bring the American people, and for that matter, patriots around the world, into this open dialogue of how we are wresting the world out of the grip of this global financier elite and putting it back in the hands of sovereign nations led by the United States. So we're going to touch on sections on the Mideast, on Europe, on Russia, and so on in the course, and of course, South America, the Western Hemisphere, which is a major part of this, in the course of the discussion. But I want to leave my opening remarks there and let Barbara address some of the response to this.
Yeah, just a quick update here. I put a link to this document, the official document that comes from the White House web server. That's linked. I pinned the comment in the chat, and I also put the link in the description. But if you just search for National Security Strategy of the United States, November 2025, you should get you should find the PDF document with no problem. And yes, I agree. It is very easy to read. It reads very approachably. It opens up very approachably, and it reads like something like an article. It reads very well.
Okay, so the response to this, I'm going to focus on one thing, which is very important to me as the treasurer of Promethean PAC, which to say, what is Congress doing about this at this point, and how does that relate to 2026? As everybody knows, or should know at this point, it's very clear that Donald Trump is under the most intense attack that he has experienced. And I basically say it's more than Russiagate. It's even more than Ukrainegate. It's more than anything that happened in the first term. And what is going on is a very deliberate attempt to completely dissemble the coalition which elected Trump in 2024. And he was awarded not with just a rotten economy, he was awarded with a rotten Congress. So he's proceeded by executive order. They have done essentially now come forward because the vote in 2024 intimidated them. And so now you have a National Defense Authorization Act, which is about to go through the Senate, and which actually says the Congress should decide whether Trump can pull down troop levels in Europe, i.e., whether he can actually end the Ukraine war without the United States being stuck in Europe continuing the war. It also has other very nasty poison pills in it, and almost a dare for him to actually, veto it, which is funding, of course, the defense of the United States, which is why a lot of congressmen haven't even read it, and they're going to get on it because essentially they have to get the defense part of it out of the way prior to, and this is the Democrats' play, probably shutting down the government over health care in January. And what is going on is very much centered on Trump being the revolutionary that he is, actually doing what he's doing and overturning this apparatus which has controlled us ever since the Second World War. So that's why Susan says this is a historic document. It is a very historic document, but the enemy fire around it is incredible. And all of the crap you see on social media, the attacks on Turning Point USA, the attacks on J.D. Vance, the attacks on Marco Rubio, the attacks on Pete Hegseth, all of it is based, and the attacks most certainly on this issue of the military and the war on drugs, which is really coming to the fore. All of it is part and parcel of this establishment attack, wanting to go back to the old world, which they control. So I'll leave it at that. We'll be talking about a lot of this as we get into specific questions.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. I'd like to welcome everyone to our chat. I see a lot of names that join us every week. Thank you, everyone. I try to read every comment. It is hard, but I try to make sure I put eyes on every comment. So I'll be watching and pulling up stuff that comes up. Also, we'll take any super chats. So I wanted to actually open up on something that kind of played out in the last 24 hours after I realized what was going on. We received a question coming off of what Barbara was talking about. We received this question last week from Mike. We'd like to thank you for sending this in. Mike sent in a question. What do you make of the latest rant against Donald Trump by Victor Davis Hanson about the exchange with the Navy Admiral over the Venezuela issue? Okay, so this, he also sent in this video here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show parts of this video just to give people a sense of the type of warfare that's being waged against the administration right now. Let me take this one away. All right. Remove. No, come back. Okay, this is, sorry to always have problems with sharing the screen with the StreamYard, but it always trips me up. Move. There we go. Okay. So this video here, I'm just going to play a few
Hello,
seconds of it.
and thank you for coming back.
Right.
Sure you are. I hope
And
you have a
this is the
wonderful
kind of
Christmas. I
video-
really hope you are.
This is the kind of video right now that people are watching on YouTube.
Wild things throughout the years, but this is something that is completely different from everything else. However, before we go into it, you are aware.
All right. So what I wanted to bring up here, so it almost looks real. Okay, not possible. Trump freaks out after Admiral strikes back hard. So Barbara and Susan, do you know anything about this Admiral striking back hard? Like,
Well, people will recall that we've been in a crazy Democratic Party generated apparent debate about whether anything that's being done against drugs in terms of the Caribbean is actually legal or not, and whether Trump and Hegseth are guilty of war crimes for blowing up drug boats. Now, a poll run by the Reagan Library says that blowing up drug boats is among the most popular of the president's current policies with the American people. This, I believe, is a fake. All right, look at the size of his head on the body. And also,
Oh no, this is definitely a fake, right? This page here, Voice for Seniors, actually puts in their disclaimer, this is a fan-made channel and not affiliated with Victor Davis Hanson or any institutions associated with them. Our videos are inspired by his public talks. The problem is people will take these videos that show up on this quote unquote fan-made channel and put them onto other platforms with none of this background right here. And so deep fake video right now is really taking over all of social media. I mean, you have some social media platforms that are made up on just nothing but AI generated video.
All right, let me finish, Adam. So basically what this says is very similar when you think about it to the Ukraine Gate impeachment. Remember what happened? You had all of this crazy hype ahead about this telephone call where the hype said, what Trump said is, if you basically give me dirt on Biden and his family in Ukraine, that's the original characterization of that telephone call. And Trump said, okay, I'll make the call public, which he did. And it was, basically a very, very different telephone call than what was being asserted in all of the Psy-war hype ahead of time. This is, taken by one of Trump's basic supporters. And what Hanson says is what happened here is Trump had to be physically taken out of the room after he had a big fight with Admiral Halsey, who was then the head of Southern Command, about the drug boat blow-up policy. And think about that. They're saying that the military had to pick the president up and actually take him out of the room because he's, all right? That's what you're supposed to take from that presentation by someone who you may know from Fox News has been a regular, complete supporter of Trump and MAGA. In fact, he wrote a book about it. So that shows you the level of the stuff which is going on, trying to twist and turn things at this point. And the cause of it is exactly what Susan said. Trump is revolutionizing and taking us back to classic American foreign policy, which, in the words of John Quincy Adams, Americans do not go abroad seeking monsters to destroy. So that's where I'll leave that one.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give a quick shout out here, super chat to Ghost. We get questions like this all the time, so I'll take it very quickly, give it a quick answer. What are the chances Canada gets annexed? Our Canadian government are hell-bent globalists. Help. And MAGA. Thank you very much, Ghost, for the comment. I don't think the United States is going to be annexing Canada anytime soon. I think you guys are going to have to start that initiative on your own if you want that to happen. Barbara or Susan, any comment on Canada being annexed?
It's as you say, this is not, the Canadian situation has to develop internally. As we'll see as we go through this document, the president is very clear. He wants to support sovereign governments and will do what he can to help the people in these circumstances. But once you adhere to the principle of sovereignty, it really has to be left up to the people of each nation.
I agree. It does really come down to sovereignty of a nation. All right, first question here. These questions, the questions that we're about to take come from our newsletter supporters. We do a daily, once a day email newsletter. So the questions that you're seeing right now come from those supporters, and we'll also take questions from the chat as they come in. So the first one here is from Tessa. President Trump always appears to look at the bigger picture. Will he demand change in the UK and the EU? No country can cut themselves off from the rest of the world. When President Trump knows the direction of the European continent and where they are heading, how will this decide the direction of the USA? Will he make his move and close them down? America is the most powerful country in the world. How much longer can Europe go on, and what could he do? The UK becomes more like China with their social control policies with every day that passes. How can this current situation not worry the USA? Thank you, Tessa, for your question and comment. Barbara and Susan.
Adam, can you share the screen again? So I'm going to take you through a few sections of the NSS, which directly address that. First, Tessa's first assertion.
Can you just make the text size bigger on your screen there?
I can do that.
It'll help everyone a little bit. Yeah, just blow it up as wide as it'll go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. The first comment that Tessa made was very important because it went to the basic principles. So this is right at the very beginning. This is the introduction. So it's actually page 1. People who have this can follow along or find it when they look at it. These are stunning statements. At the end of the Cold War, American foreign policy elites convinced themselves that permanent American domination of the entire world was in the best interests of our country. But Trump asserts the affairs of other countries are our concern only if their activities directly threaten our interests. And then let's go down here in terms of, what he says or what this document says. The elites overestimated America's ability to fund simultaneously a massive welfare regulatory administrative state alongside a massive military, diplomatic, intelligence, and foreign aid complex. They placed hugely misguided, destructive bets on globalization and so-called free trade that hollowed out the very middle class and industrial base of the United States. And then they say they sucked us into conflicts and controversies central to their interests, and they lashed American policy to a network of international institutions, some of which are driven by outright anti-Americanism and many by a transnationalism that explicitly seeks to dissolve individual state sovereignty. So you have never seen anything like this. Now I'm going to go down to what we want. And again, because I think it's important for the basic principles of what this document rejects and what this document embraces. First and foremost, we want the continued survival and safety of the United States as an independent, sovereign republic whose government secures the God-given natural rights of its citizens and prioritizes their well-being and interest. Then I just want to slip down here because I'm not going to sit here and read a whole bunch of this. But this is infused throughout. We want the world's most robust industrial base. American national power depends on a strong industrial sector. Cultivating industrial strength must be the highest priority of national economic policy. And it goes on in this way, addressing energy, science and technology, and so on. And the restoration and reinvigoration of American spiritual and cultural health. So I want you to have that framework in mind as we look at some of the specific areas. Now, Tessa asked explicitly about Europe, and I am going to go to page 25, which is the section on Europe, which is really a stunning section, as people may have picked up in the press, rather than the usual post-Cold War, or for that matter, post-war policies of the Anglo-American establishment, which basically established NATO, then later the EU, and tied the United States to these transnational, international, globalist institutions where the policies came not from what was in the interests of individual countries, but what was in the interests of the international financier elite. And I would say that the country that has suffered the most, the countries, the sector of the world that has fallen the most, let me put it that way, as a result of these globalist transnational policies, has been the continent of Europe, and in particular, the European Union and the United Kingdom itself. So what Trump does in this document is I'm saying Trump, I mean, this was written by his administration, but this is essentially Trump's policies. What he does in terms of Europe is absolutely stunning, because he warns right here, and we've seen this, Barbara addressed this on Monday, that Europe is collapsing. And as the document says, it faces the stark prospect of civilizational erasure. And what the document identifies is the collapse of their economies, which have been some of the most strong embraces of green policies, completely unfettered immigration and open borders, and free trade. And the effect of this, as this document says, is these European countries may not exist as recognizable countries in the next 10 to 20 years. It also attacks the Europe's embrace of the Ukraine war, which we've addressed as well. And then, in answer specifically to the question, what is Trump doing about this? These are a bunch of really strong statements where Trump is saying, I'm pursuing a policy completely different from you lunatics. And, you know, you should listen to me. So point number one, reestablish conditions of stability within Europe and strategic stability with Russia, not perpetual wars. This is one of the most interesting ones that has the European countries completely freaked out. Cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations. In other words, if there's a national or sovereign type movement in a country, Donald Trump is gonna support that. And here's another really fundamental one: ending the perception and preventing the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance. So again, in this European section, you have Trump basically saying the globalist experiment has failed. It's destroying Europe and Britain. And we will do whatever we can to save Europe because Western civilization is very, very precious. So that's how I'll answer that question.
Thank you, Susan. So just everyone, a quick heads up. If you're interested, the document that Susan is reading from is the National Security Strategy of the United States 2025, just released by the White House about a week ago or so. You can find the link to the official PDF that's hosted from the White House website. You can find the link is pinned in the comments, or you can find it in the description. You can also search for National Security Strategy 2025 PDF. I'm sure it'll come up. Okay, so I'm going to take the next question from, actually, no, quick detour here. I had some super chats come in. First from Melody Hart. Thank you very much for the support and for joining us every week. We couldn't do any of this without people like Melody. I know you're already subscribed to our email list in our YouTube channel, but if you've been enjoying what you've been seeing so far, please subscribe to the YouTube channel here. We do 3 political briefings a week plus this live show. And we also have an email newsletter. You can find the link to the newsletter in the description. We do an email once every day. And finally, before we continue here, please give us a quick like on the YouTube video if you're watching live. See, we have about 1,500 concurrent viewers. Thank you very much, everyone. And please give us a quick like. It really boosts our viewership on YouTube. Okay, thank you very much for the support, Melody. And quick one here, Moon Money. At the Canada question, the native Hawaiians rose up against the Hawaiian monarchy and became the Republic of Hawaii. That was the pathway to territory to 50th state. Thank you very much, Moon Money, for your insight. And make sure you're subscribed. If you haven't yet already, subscribe to the YouTube channel, give it a like, and get our free newsletter. Thank you. Okay, next question here from Edward, who's another longtime supporter and viewer. Why is the United States still in NATO and the United Nations if these are truly organizations that were essentially started by the British and staffed with mostly non-American system people? Thank you, Edward, for the question. Barbara and Susan.
Well, I think the United States might not be in NATO unless they wise up. I think that's Trump's message right now to all of these crazy people, that this war's got to end. And if NATO proceeds to keep fighting it, maybe we're not going to be in it. Now, obviously, that would cause a major ruckus with Congress and with the defense industrial complex, which we see very active right now. With respect to the UN, a friend of mine once described it as a very useful social forum, and that's about it. And otherwise, it's a place where people can meet and have some dialogue between their countries, which can be useful. Otherwise, it's nothing but a globalist institution, which is absurd, and it's kind of become like, one of these consensus building tools for the elite. You're quite correct, not what the original intention was, which was to find, at least in Roosevelt's view, to find commonality among sovereign nation states and to really proceed on the basis of common principles, not elite programs against populations of sovereign nation states. So I'll leave it at that. I don't think we're going to end our relationship to that discussion forum, and that's all that it is at best anytime soon. Regarding NATO, I think that's one of the things Trump is considering.
But I will note there's a couple of people in the chat, who did identify, for example, Sebastian Gorka said Trump will never leave NATO. He has problems with a section of the so-called MAGA base, and somebody else said Congress will never approve it. These are treaties. And as we have said before and will continue to say, Trump's ability to do things is twofold. Number one, the things he can do by executive action, which he has done brilliantly in the first 11 months of his presidency. But then there's a lot of stuff he can or cannot do based on his support from the Congress. And we do not at this moment have a MAGA Congress. We have a Republican Congress, barely. We don't have a MAGA Congress. And each and every one of you Americans on this responsibility over the coming 11 months is going to be to make sure that we do get a MAGA Congress. And we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. This next question, I think the overall theme is definitely on a lot of people's minds throughout the world. This one is on the relationship between the US and Qatar. I'm concerned about the US and Qatar relationship. On the one side, Qatar is the top donor to our university and invested billions of dollars in the US economy. However, Qatar is a big supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood and other terrorist groups, Hamas. How does the US government conduct business with Qatar? So sorry to ask this question not related to the Q&A. I'm just confused. Thank you very much, Alex, for the question. Barbara or Susan?
Qatar houses the Central Command of the United States as a military base. That's point number one. And I don't think Trump is really excited about giving up that military base. We put a huge amount of investment to it, and the Central Command is kind of a very important part of, our access militarily to the rest of the world. All of these things are true. Okay, Qatar basically is a big supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. It has been a negotiating thing, which is key to Trump's Middle East peace plan. In other words, it talks to and has supported Hamas. And I might add that it supported Hamas up until October 27th at the behest of the Israeli government, a fact which very few people actually know. So it plays a kind of mediator role among all of these various factions. It has a ton of money. And basically, I think Trump is using them. I don't think he's controlled by them. A lot of people like to say, oh my God, basically we're in a situation with this country that means Trump has fallen under their influence. I don't think that is the way he actually conducts policy. He looks at what can you do for the United States? That's his primary concern. What can you do for me and the United States of America? And they have played a very, very critical role, despite all of the things which you can attach to them within the framework of trying to bring about peace in the Middle East, which is a critical national security interest of ourselves. And what people will be shocked by in the new national security document is that neither Russia or the Middle East are top priorities of the new national security doctrine. That's a complete shift. We were very much involved in the Middle East when we didn't have, our own facility by which to produce massive amounts of oil and petroleum products. And we had to basically be in a situation of making sure that we were getting the amount of energy we needed. That's why Franklin Roosevelt, on one of his last foreign policy journeys, went to the Saudis and said, America and not the British are going to try and come into Saudi Arabia and basically dominate your oil supply to feed our industries and our manufacturing. That's over with now that we actually are, becoming completely independent in terms of that fuel source, and we don't need to do it. And there's a recognition of that. But think about the number of careers among lobbyists in Washington that will have to be changed by that. There are a lot of people who've made their money off of Middle East conflict and it being perpetual. Now, all of a sudden, they don't have a future ahead of them because Trump has changed everything. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, next question. President Trump appears to be Israel first, and yet the mainstream media hates him. Why the disconnect? Thank you, David, for your question.
Adam, can we share again?
Yes.
Because I'm going to go back to the national security document again. This is the section on the Mideast, which does bolster what Barbara just said. But as I go through this section, what you're going to be shocked by is the fact that it only mentions Israel once, and that's in the context of other nations in the region. But it opens making the point that Barbara made. For half a century at least, American foreign policy has prioritized the Middle East above all other regions. The reasons are obvious. It was for decades the world's most important supplier of energy, and it was a prime theater of superpower competition and was rife with conflict. Today, at least two of those dynamics no longer hold. She mentions the energy, and because of what President Trump has done, superpower competition, that's very interesting, has given way to great power jockeying. Now, to actually translate this, what they are saying is this has been a playground of geopoliticians forever, where countries are simply pawns on the chessboard. Some of it has to do with a lot of it did have to do with the energy, the oil supplies. A lot of it just had to do with the British Empire's desire to control the heartland and so on, so that these wars continued, packaged in the idea of superpower competition. And this document says this has given way to great power jockeying, where the United States retains an enviable position because of the revitalization of our alliances in the Gulf with other Arab partners and with Israel. And it mentions Israel a couple of other times, as you see here, but in the context of our relations with everybody else. And it concludes by saying we can and must address the ideological threat that Israel must remain secure. And I don't think anybody should argue with that. The question of How Israel is conducting itself at the moment under a current government is a different question, but you do have an actual sovereign nation with a whole lot of people living in it, and it does have a right to be secure. But then it says we can and must address this threat, the threat of radicalism. We must address this ideologically and militarily without the decades of fruitless so-called nation building, which was regime change wars, which was a stock and trade of Bush and Obama and Biden. And we also have a clear interest in expanding the Abraham Accords to more regions more nations in the region and to other countries in the Muslim world. And again, but the days in which the Middle East dominated American foreign policy are thankfully over because we're stabilizing it. So I'm sure the Zionist lobby, the Anti-Defamation League, AIPAC, they are probably just as hysterical as the NATO crowd, the British, the Europeanists, and of course, they're probably all the same people, over this shift in emphasis in this. So, people should just stop their knee-jerk reactions. We're being run by the Zionists. Israel runs everything. Donald Trump is doing something completely different. And how it works itself out in immediate negotiations or our immediate slapping down of Netanyahu and the Israelis might not be to everybody's liking, but this is a dramatic change in policy.
Thank you, Susan. There is a lot of back and forth in the chat right now. You can believe that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Okay, so we're going to take the next question on, I believe it's NSS and Jamie Dimon. How is Trump's national security strategy? All right, and just for context, if you're joining us, the document that Susan was reading from was Trump's national security strategy. That's really kind of the main topic that we're leading with so far. You can find a copy of that national security strategy in the pinned comment in the chat or in the description. You can get a copy. I urge everyone to read it. So how is Trump's national security strategy plan going to compare with Dimon's JPMorgan plan? Aren't they working in different ways? Will Trump be able to succeed in his plan? Thank you, Karen, for the question. Barbara or Susan?
Yeah, I think that people have a lot of trouble with the idea that Trump is basically organizing or reorganizing the elites. And he's using as his model the idea that basically what happened in the World War II mobilization, which is talked about in the book, which we recommend people read, called Freedom's Forge. And what happened there is that Roosevelt got the private sector of the US economy, particularly all the manufacturers, the big ones, to engage in creating a rapid economic renaissance and buildup of the United States from practically nothing. Remember, we're coming into World War II right out of the Depression. And, this was the most incredible economic mobilization which probably ever took place. And Trump is trying to replicate it. Now, various people, and JPMorgan has been always a British asset in the United States, a British imperial asset in the United States. Susan, in her latest video, shows you, his celebration of King Charles's birthday. He did a similar thing in Manhattan, draping his building in the British flag for some kind of celebration of his birthday, and invited all the British to come in and said that he was bemoaning the terrible things which were happening within the Atlantic Alliance, i.e. with what Trump is doing. So these guys can't begin to succeed in confronting MAGA. Here's their dilemma, without pretending to be like Trump and like MAGA. So what does Dimon do? Well, he basically creates an investment fund in the U.S. industrial and military base. JPMorgan has a ton of money just sitting on the sidelines, which you can use for this, because his bank hasn't been loaning any money to real industry for years. All right. And, he's got a huge slush fund. So now basically what he's trying to say is, okay, we can mimic Trump and we can actually do all these investments, but we're going to do them with this board of advisors, which is basically consists of every damn freak from the Bush administration, Condoleezza Rice. It goes on. Susan goes through it in her latest video, which I urge you to watch. It's all basically laid out in a Wall Street Journal article. At the same time, Trump, I bet, is looking at this thing and saying, hey, I want JPMorgan's money there. How am I going to actually put the foot on their butt to actually get that money into actual investment in the United States, not some crazy plan by Tony Blair, which is also the big name on his advisory committee, and Jamie Dimon to run in competition with the Trump plan. So that's what's going on. I think, Trump is also, people get upset. Oh my God, Trump was meeting with Jamie Dimon. Isn't he meeting with the enemy? No, he's basically taking, looking at what they're saying, taking their basic orientation and figuring out how he can apply the kick in the butt to actually put them into motion with his plan. The people who basically came to the fore in private industry on behalf of the United States under Roosevelt hated Roosevelt. They despised him, but, he convinced them that the actual interests of the United States of America was bigger than their individual greed and their tendency to want to simply make profits for themselves. I think Trump is pursuing a similar strategy. But all of it, I might add, depends on you guys out there. The only way that we're going to triumph in 2026, because the Republican candidates, let's face it, guys, are awful, is, if what happens is the American people come out in droves and says, yes, you got my vote, but here's the conditions. All right, you have to support President Trump's policy in the Congress. And the more that becomes a movement like that, the more these guys are going to basically be brought into line. You can take a different view, which is you say, oh, it's all controlled. I can't participate anymore. I'm just going to sit it out, at which point the nation is lost. It depends on you guys out there. That's our fate. And that's where I'll leave it.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, I'd like to give a quick thank you to Stefano. I'm going to take your question here. Thank you for your very generous super chat. Tulsi Gabbard came out with the evidence against Obama, etc. Where are the indictments? Do you believe justice will be achieved? Why hasn't anyone been arrested? Time is running out and nothing appears to be happening. Stefano, thank you very much for writing this in. We get so many questions every week. This is a constant question, a constant theme that we get from our supporters, and honestly, from the MAGA movement in general. I would also say the left says almost exactly the same thing about us constantly. So everyone's saying the same thing. Why aren't there more arrests of everyone? So, but I know this is very specific. Where are the arrests? Is justice coming? Barbara and Susan?
I think there's a twofold strategy which is being operated here. Number one is exposure. And I know people said, well, I know everything already. I've seen it all. You have to turn all of that into factual evidence. All right. There's, as Dan Bongino said the other day, when I made a lot of money being paid for my opinions. Now what I have to do is I actually have to present facts and evidence in a court of law. And that's a different thing than your opinion. There's all sorts of procedural things. There's all sorts of jurisdictional things, starting with where do you bring the case? Most of these crimes, the natural venue and jurisdiction is, guess what? Washington, D.C. All right, now think about that. John Durham tried that. Did he get any convictions? No. All right. Why? Because the judiciary is completely corrupt and the jury pool is incredibly brainwashed. Now, the alternative, which they tried to pursue with Comey, was Eastern District of Virginia. Well, you have the same problem. These are all government workers. Whether you go to Norfolk, which they tried, or you do it in Alexandria, which is a pit. I have some personal experience with that court. And the U.S. Attorney's Office is ridiculous. It's all people from the Justice Department that were kicked out when these new guys came in. You've got to basically you got to do two things. One is you have to go after criminals. That's what the Justice Department is actually supposed to do. It's not supposed to be a new Nuremberg tribunal for the crimes which occurred in the last administration. Although, believe me, I want all those people to be in prison. But the issue becomes, okay, how do you do these cases in such a way that you win them? Most people would say, well, let's just arrest these people. Okay, well, then you've got to prosecute them. You can't hold them for, ever if you just arrest them. There's a limit on that set by the law. You've got to basically prosecute them. And if you prosecute them, you have to win. The impact in our present situation of having acquittals or failures to prosecute, just like happened with Letitia James in the Eastern District of Virginia, is a real conundrum because we have corrupt courts and we have places in the United States that are completely brainwashed in terms of the jury pool. So, and the press will take advantage of all of that. Now, they're talking about doing a major conspiracy case down in Florida. That's a very good idea because there's no statute of limitations on conspiracy. The only problem I have with the way they're talking about that is it seems to me the case would be pretty unwieldy. I think there's two conspiracy cases that you could make, and I think both of them should be brought in Florida. But you've got to basically create the case, not in terms of what comes out in even a congressional hearing, which is mostly hearsay, and other things which you can't present in a trial court. Okay, not even in terms of what people's opinions are, which is, hang the bastards. I think that's a wonderful sentiment in terms of what occurred, but you have to basically prove it. So I am patient because I know what goes into bringing legal cases. All right. My patience, however, is being tested. I'll tell you right now, because I think they have to be much more open without doing exactly what the Biden Justice Department did, which is trial by press. All right. You do not want to do that because it undercuts the entire system and how it's supposed to operate in terms of, these people, like anybody, have rights under our Constitution as criminal defendants. You don't just abrogate all of that and throw it out the window because of your emotions about the gravity of what they've actually done here. So that's how I'd answer your question. It's all over. People are very impatient. And I am too, but I also understand what it takes to put a case together.
I'll just add one other thing. I have a certain amount of impatience too, but it's tempered by my conviction that revolutions are not made in courts. Donald Trump is carrying out a political and an economic revolution. And that is not something that you do through judicial processes. I think that is the institution that will move the slowest and come along the latest. And people who say, "Oh, I've had it because we're not getting arrests." Well, I'm sorry, then you're not a revolutionary because the revolution is actually taking place someplace else.
Thank you very much.
Just to underline Susan's point here, I like to always cite the historical example of the SPD in Germany during Hitler's rise to power. Okay, they had the majority of the population mobilized against Hitler, and instead they went into court and tried to get a TRO. That kind of didn't work out so well. It's up to the people. That's what our Constitution says.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Stefano, for your question. Please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and get our free newsletter. And I'd also like to give a quick shout out to Jeff in Utah. Thank you for joining us every week. Barbara is on fire today, preaching reality and strategic thinking. Thank you very much for your support. Wish you a Merry Christmas. And actually, I wish a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone on the stream. I should have opened with that. We're getting very close to Christmas, and I hope everyone is having a great time with their friends and their family this year. All right, so let's continue on the question. Goes back to a slightly more international topic. Yeah, this is it. No, number 6. Okay. Okay, this is a longtime supporter, Dennis from Berkeley Springs. You often refer to the four-power alliance of the US, Russia, India, and China going all the way back to Lyndon LaRouche. What happened to India? They don't appear to be involved any longer. And thank you for adding a list of sources and references to the video. You're welcome on that. But India, what's the role? What's going on with India and the BRICS right now? Does anyone know what's going on? Obviously, the United States relations with Russia is definitely on the front burner right now. Peace negotiations and the relationship between United States and China is constantly in the news, but you don't really hear so much about the United States and India recently. There's a lot of negative stuff going on the internet about India, but I'm talking about in the news. There doesn't seem to be so much with the United States and India right now. I think that's what Dennis is kind of going at. Any comments from Barbara or Susan?
Look, I mean, India is incredibly important, and Putin just completed a visit there. Based on a long time, not alliance, but relationship to Russia, which India has had, over decades. And they've always been neutral. They were the founders, after all, what was called the non-aligned movement back during the Cold War. And I think they're very much, in the fore. I think there's a little bit of tension right now regarding the settlement of the India and Pakistani war by Trump. Some Indians actually believe that Trump kind of sided with Pakistan a little too much in that. But I fully expect that India is coming on board with this and that the relationship remains with Trump as strong as ever. I just think there's been a real focus, first and foremost. Also, they've been very tough in the tariff negotiations. So you're getting a certain level of blowback on that. And they can't really afford as an economy to be anything other than tough on the tariff negotiations from the standpoint of their own nation state. But you're getting a little bit of that tension coming to the fore also. So I don't have any doubt that, basically all of that is very much on track, provided we get this damn Ukraine war settled.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Okay, I'd like to give a quick shout out to our channel real quick. If you're just tuning in, we have more concurrent viewers than we usually do. If you're just tuning in, please make sure you subscribe to our channel. We do 3 political updates a week. We do Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. And we do a live question and answer show, which you're watching right now, every Thursday morning. So please subscribe to the channel and keep in touch with us. We also have an email newsletter we do daily. Didn't start off daily, but we just have so much to say. There's so much going on in the world. We basically have to send you something daily. We're working on a weekly product too. You can find a link to get our free email newsletter, links in the description. All right, so the next set, I'm going to take the next 2 questions together. They were not written as a pair, but this is very indicative of the dialogue that's still going on inside MAGA and really the policy fights that are not settled in the minds of people yet. So first one we're going to take is from Evelyn, who's a longtime follower of Promethean Action. Thank you for sending in this question. And then we're going to take one right after it. I don't think Trump's war on drugs is working. And the news reported that he killed an innocent fisherman. Well, according to his family, that's what he said he was doing. With drones and satellites, Couldn't these drug ships be captured and the contents be confiscated so that the death count be reduced? Blowing up shit in the ocean seems a bit much, not to mention fuel spills and the harm it will do to the ocean. How about educating Americans not to do drugs? I realize the Just Say No campaign backfired into the opioid pandemic, but this news headline needs to stop. Trump should be working on the economy, jobs, and changing the minds of 18 to 35-year-olds out there that vote, that are on TikTok trying to create content to make an income. How will he shape the hearts and minds of the future when all they want is free stuff, a cashless society, and to live off the grid? Thank you, Evelyn, for your observations and for your question. And then here's kind of the flip side of what a lot of other people are thinking. As you already mentioned, Trump's PR team, if he has one, are not explaining very well to Joe Public the reasons for the measures he is taking. Venezuela is probably the most puzzling to most and is a really useful subject for detractors to attack Trump. Is the lack of explanation due to not wanting to reveal the real strategy, or will something happen in 2026 that will reveal all and secure the midterms? Keep up the good work. You're doing great. Thank you, John, for your observation and for your comment. So Barbara and Susan, this drug boat issue, the issue of the war on drugs, this is very polarizing issue for Americans right now. Questions and comments?
Well, I'll start. Basically where Trump is starting from, I think is correct. You have to send a signal to the cartels. You're not dealing with, nice fishermen who happen to get caught because they're poor, selling drugs to make a dime. All right. You're dealing with criminal cartels who are brutal, who carve people up, who haven't basically flinched one bit at poisoning the youth of our country and killing them, which is what has been happening. People have to face up to that. Fentanyl, coke, which is now coming into the United States, mostly from the Pacific side of the operation in terms of ocean-going traffic, but also through the Atlantic, where the drugs, yes, are going to Europe, but also Venezuela represents a key money laundering and other nexus for the drug trade. The estimates is if you were capable of actually changing Venezuela, you would knock out a great deal of the money laundering and financial apparatus in the Caribbean, which finances the drug trade. All of the British offshore banks are in that Caribbean nexus. And that in part is what this whole thing is about. There is no question but that Maduro is either a victim or a pawn of a big criminal organization, which is running a whole country. Just take a look at the continent of South America, and then take a look at the Caribbean, and think about how cocaine and other drugs coming from, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, going into the East Coast of the United States and to Europe. The amount of money which is laundered from that is huge. And the primary laundering points are in the Caribbean. That's what Trump is attacking. Is he explaining it very well? Well, part of that is that he's got to be very careful, because we're using informants in these monstrous organizations to actually get our intelligence, along with satellites and all the things that are being talked about. With respect to not doing it by killing people, we've been trying to do that for years. All right. We've been trying to simply intercept the boats, take the drugs, prosecute the people who are running the drugs. That's been the strategy. And somehow or other, that doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work because you've got to send a signal that you are willing to go all the way in terms of eradicating the drug trade. If you don't send that signal, then the drug trade, it is a government which is more powerful than any country south of our border. It's a government. You could call it Dope Incorporated, which we did in our prior association beginning in 1975. I point out that the biggest bank in the world, Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, we've been attacking since the 70s as the foremost drug bank in the world. It still is, but now it's the biggest bank in the entire damn world. And they just got hit again for the umpteenth time for millions of dollars in drug money laundering. So this is a big operation, and it's a war. It's an actual shooting war. A lot of people are on the take to the cartels and to the drug industry, particularly, I might say, a lot of Republicans in terms of, selling marijuana, which is a very, very big deal within former Republican Party politicians. They make a ton of money off of the legalization of very, very strong pot, which, in my humble opinion, is actually not the kind of pot which most boomers are familiar with. The types that gives you giggles and makes you eat a lot. This is a type of pot which makes you psychotic. And it's a whole different type of operation that's going on here. So it's a big deal. Yes, I agree that it's not being explained very well. We need to do better. We need something like fireside chats with the American population on this. And I believe Trump is undertaking this by actually going out on the trail, which he's going to be doing more and more and more. You're going to see a lot more coming out of the administration in terms of messaging.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Want to give some quick shout outs here first to Technotest. Thank you very much for your support. The Lord is with America. Peace is possible and will come. I agree very much. Being optimistic and trying to find the creative solutions and trying to bring those solutions into physical reality, you have to stay optimistic, and you have to know that the truth is on the side of the good and the righteous. So thank you very much for your support. And also, I don't believe I've seen you, DK. Thank you very much for the super sticker. I wish they showed up on the chat, but it doesn't on the screen here. Please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and get our free newsletter. You don't even have to pay. Don't worry about paying. Just get our free newsletter. Let us stay in contact with you. We have some plans that we're building for the future, and we want to make sure you know about them. So get our free newsletter. So thank you very much. Okay, so let's see what questions we're going to take next here. Any particular topic you ladies want to take? We can do. There's a question here on Cuba, or how can Israel protect its citizens? That's always a tricky one. Okay, let's take that one. Thank you, Anne, for this question. What is Israel supposed to do to protect its citizens and also probably not look like a terrible country in the eyes of the rest of the world? So I open up, you can give a quick response if you want, but what is Israel supposed to do to protect their citizens? Thank you, Anne.
Well, what Trump's peace plan envisions is the principle of all fundamental defense and protection, which is you need economic development. You need to come to a understanding with your potential adversaries and bring them on board with the idea of developing or engaging in development of the entire area. And that's what the Abraham Accords is all about. Having an enclave in Gaza, the way which it was done, is kind of a setup for the type of warfare which was conducted. You know, in October of, if you go back and look, when the attacks by Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, occurred in Israel, things were getting very close to Saudi Arabia actually coming into the Abraham Accords. which would really have changed the dynamic of virtually everything in the Middle East. Trump is insistent that through appropriate measures, he can bring Iran on board in terms of settling the Middle East. So Israel, obviously, like any country, has to protect its citizens. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Saying that, because they're fighting urban warfare, in which anybody, I don't care if it's us or anybody else, is going to have a ton of civilian casualties because it's house-to-house warfare. We didn't do too well with that in Baghdad and fighting in Iraq ourselves. So the whole deal here is don't automatically assume that you want to become the new Sparta, which is what Benjamin Netanyahu, backed into a corner, actually advocated. Ally with the United States, ally with the Trump peace plan, and I think you'll actually see that both Israelis and Palestinians will be protected, and years of deliberately invoked religious warfare will come to an end.
Yeah, and I'll just add, look, I think the most important dynamic is what's in Trump's national security strategy, because for most of its existence, Israel has been played as a pawn by the British imperial elite to keep their great game of geopolitics going in the Mideast. And so, I mean, even when Israel was actually acting rationally, which I don't think it is under Netanyahu largely, but when it was acting rationally under Yitzhak Rabin, who negotiated the Oslo Accords with Yasser Arafat, where you actually did at least have a political architecture, not an economic one, which was part of its failing, but you had a political architecture where we were taking baby steps in resolving this conflict decades ago. Well, what happened to Yitzhak Rabin? He was assassinated, and he wasn't assassinated by a Muslim extremist. He was assassinated by a Zionist extremist, an intelligence operative, because the global elite did not want peace. So the fact that Trump is trying to put this stamp of a new national security strategy where nations aren't pawns, where the global elite are not running operations inside countries, through countries, against countries, but countries exist as sovereign nations with legitimate interests, and you work things out amongst them. I think if, again, you read that Mideast section of Trump's new national security strategy, you'll see that orientation, that paradigm is what we're moving to. And frankly, until you really are in a world of that paradigm, Israel isn't going to be secure, the Palestinians aren't going to be secure, and nobody's going to be secure. Because if the globalists are running the game, then you're going to have perpetual conflict.
Thank you very much, Barbara and Susan. I have a question in the super chat that I'm going to take, but before I do that, I do have your question here. Before I take that one, I want to take this second question here, which really is a follow-up of the last, which is asking about Islam now. Western nations led by the USA substituted the threat of communism, which followed the end of World War II till Carter's single-term presidency, with open hate and suppression for Islam. My question, isn't it time to revise this Western strategy and political trajectory and embrace, quote, moderate Islam as a viable and capable ally instead of a foe? Embracing Islam can and will open access to nearly 2 billion inhabitants of this planet and support the rise of societies that are virtuous and benign. Thank you, Dune Boss, for your question. So this is the kind of we get questions on both sides of this issue here. So I'd like to open this one up for Barbara and Susan.
Well, I'll say a few things for starters. The opening premise is extremely important because a very evil person, somebody who basically gets his bona fides from the British geopolitical outlook, Samuel P. Huntington, wrote the book, The Clash of Civilizations, which was doing precisely what you said. After the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet bloc, the global elite had to create another enemy image. It wasn't going to be the communists, although for some people they think it still is. But for their purposes, it wasn't going to be the communists. It was going to be Islam. And of course, they created radical Islam. They created the Muslim Brotherhood. They created ISIS. They created Al-Qaeda. The support for the current king, then Prince Charles, for these kinds of movements is documentable and on the record. So that is a game that they are still playing. As Barbara referenced, I think earlier, they want to keep the religious warfare going, whether it's through anti-Semitism or whether it's through anti-Islam. And again, I've said it before and I'll say it again. You can be against Bibi Netanyahu, but that doesn't make you an anti-Semite. But there is anti-Semitism. You can be against the Muslim Brotherhood and ISIS and radical Islam. But that doesn't mean, you should be against every single Muslim or Muslim American living in Dearborn, as some foolish people here in the United States think. Every Muslim American living in Dearborn wants to establish Sharia law and a caliphate. This is Psy-war nonsense, and it is playing right in to the clash of civilizations, the clash of religions, pitting different peoples against each other for the purposes of the imperial elite maintaining control. So that's what I would say about that. I don't know if Barbara wants to add anything.
Yeah, I think it's important to actually think about what Trump is doing in the Middle East. The Abraham Accords. What is he talking about? He's talking about the fundamental unity of all what are called, as he likes to call it, the Abrahamic religions. All right, those religions which, whatever their difficulties, believe, one, that there is a God, and that God created the entire universe. Once you have that belief in a religion, there are lots of things which make everything possible. All right. It doesn't mean that any state has to become a religious state. In fact, we're not a religious state. We allow for freedom of religion. And our founders had a very specific view of that. God is in everything in terms of our country. All right. He's not, exiled out like the secularists will have it. But we don't mandate that people practice a particular religion or essentially ban heresies, even Satanism. But the whole thing here is, again, a complete mischaracterization of the Islamic religion, taking those fake synthetic creations as what the religion is, just like revisionist Zionism or, the kinds of Christian Zionism, which are so much a problem in bringing about a Middle East peace, are anything like the actual Jewish religion or like actual Christianity. I really suggest that people read someone who, really looked at this question in some depth. That is Nicholas of Cusa, who many people think of as the founder of the Renaissance in terms of philosophy. He wrote a piece called The Peace of the Faith, in which he talks about how is it that an actual dialogue of religious cultures can take place. And what he stresses is you start with what unifies all of these religions. What's the belief in all of these religions which is the same? And what you'll find in the Abrahamic religions, as the president likes to say, is the belief in a supreme being who created the universe. And if you understand that, there's all sorts of possibilities which follow from that. So I think it's a good start to actually go deep into the question, not just of what the British created, but what someone who actually founded the Renaissance tried to create in terms of a unification of religions. Most people fundamentally misunderstand Islam because of September 11th, 2001, and all of the propaganda around it. They don't realize that there was a great Islamic Renaissance, which occurred, early on in humanity's lifetimes, and which resulted, we'll find this strange, and Susan will like this, in which the Western Christian world actually found out about somebody called Plato through the actions of the Islamic Renaissance. So this is an area which, we spent some time on in our former organization, but I think the place to start in terms of thinking about this is Cusa.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. We got some more super chats here. First, I want to say thank you to Anthony Russell. I don't know anything about this, so I'm just going to open this up to Barbara and Susan. Just quick question. Where do the Shriners fit into all this? Who are they, please? Again, I know they're an organization. I don't know if Barbara or Susan know anything about their history. I think if you would have asked something about like I don't know. I really don't know anything about the Shriners, but thank you for your support. I say subscribe to our channel, subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you. And a quick shout out here to Grunt or Ura, Promethean Family Affair, Barbara, Susan, and Adam, Sebastian Cavo, not as cool. Thank you and Merry Christmas. We truly need young people to be involved with this movement. Yes, I agree. I agree very much. Slowly working on a social media strategy. Actually, you know what? I should give a quick shout out for myself here. Yes, we are trying to build a wider social media strategy to bring younger people into the movement, even 30-year-olds, late 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds. We're trying to bring a wider range of people into this movement. If you're on X, follow me on x.com. It's right there in my channel. It's right there under my name here. Follow me on X and DM me if you want to get involved. I want to help people basically build effective social media presences that actually build audiences and actually build you influence on social media. I see so many people just doing the usual things like reposting nonstop, but they don't know how to actually create their own original content. So you can reach out to me on x.com, maybe be a part of our strategy here to definitely take a wider, bring in a wider net of people by using social media. So thank you very much, Grunt. Thank you very much for the support. I appreciate it. And yes, Merry Christmas to you, brother. Okay, let's take the next question here. I think this is also a very good one. This comes from a supporter here, Tim from Ohio. Hi, Susan and Barbara. Could you please explain the blue slip that Senator Grassley continues to use to thwart the president's cabinet picks, and how can it be reversed? I don't believe the majority of the public understands this true uniparty measure. Thank you, and I look forward to Friday's strategy call. Thank you, Tim in Ohio. I don't even know what this blue slip thing is either. I suspect a lot of others don't.
Okay, well, I'll take that. The blue slip is something that really is outdated. It used to be that the United States Senate was much more of a collaborative and deliberate body than it is today. And what happened back at that old time, a long time ago and far, far, far away in a different nation in space somewhere, what would happen is that when a judge or a U.S. attorney came up for nomination in a given state, the senators from that state had a kind of veto power over the president's picks. So mostly what happened is that the blue slip wasn't used except in extraordinary circumstances, because it was understood that if you had a president who was a Republican and you were a Democratic Party senator, you sort of had to let him have his picks in terms of judges and, U.S. attorneys because that's the way the thing works. Since we become so incredibly polarized, the Democratic Party has turned into the party of insurrection. Now what's being done is that the procedure by which a senator could object to a nomination by the president for a judge or a U.S. attorney is called the blue slip. They submit a blue slip to the clerk of the Senate saying, I object, and it essentially holds up the entire process until they either come around or what have you. Right now, Grassley, who I don't believe actually realizes, quite frankly, that the old country far, far, far away in another galaxy no longer exists, continues to stick by the rules and procedures of the Senate, since the senators love them, and they're basically much more of a collaborative body than the very fractious House. That's been the way throughout our history. So that's the problem, and both that and, the filibuster are ancient Senate procedures for another time. We're in a different time, and we essentially should get rid of the blue slip and let the president have his way.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Susan, you want to say anything on this one?
No, I mean, just to underscore the point, we're operating in a completely polarized, factionalized world in which there's almost nothing in the Democratic Party other than partisanship. And a lot of the old procedures, the way things were done, as Barbara said, in a different universe, really no longer apply. And Trump needs the freedom to get his people in, and we need to get rid of the filibuster.
Thank you. All right, next question. 2028, what's going on with this? What's the relationship between the Koch brothers and the Bush family reuniting the old GOP for the 2028 campaign? This is part of our thing here. The JPMorgan $1.5 trillion group has a lot of the old Bush network people in it. So again, this is part of this investment thing by JPMorgan is designed to influence in a major way the 2028 election and beyond. So Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on the 2028 elections and JD Vance's role in 2028?
Well, I mean, I can take this up directly because I see it directly on the ground here in Michigan. The Koch family is the major force between the organization called Americans for Prosperity, which in the past, when there was a fight to try and stop Trump from getting the nomination, they were always very much openly, viscerally, publicly on the other side. Now that Trump is in office, obviously commanding huge support, loyalty from the MAGA base and much of the Republican Party, they've had to pivot. They're buying time. So Americans for Prosperity has sort of dropped any political slant for the moment. They're out there all over the country holding nice little seminars, teaching people how to knock on doors and organize around local policies and so on. And my belief is and I think many of the people involved at the grassroots level are perfectly nice grassroots people who think that they're teaching people how to knock on doors. But the people who run Americans for Prosperity, the Koch interests, I suspect very strongly that their strategy is just insinuate themselves as nice people throughout the movement. And then when the fight erupts over 2028, you're going to find them very much on the side of anybody but Trump and probably anybody but Vance. One of my friends, by the way, calls them Americans for Chinese Prosperity because they hate tariffs and love free trade, which only help China. And that does get to the question of JD Vance, because from where I sit, the person who is most qualified to carry forward Trump's especially economic revolution, but also strategic revolution, is JD Vance. You look at his life, you look at his development, you look at the role that he's playing in the administration at this point, you look at his comprehension of the American system. And he's more explicit in terms of many of these principles than even Trump is. Now, of course, in the world of social media and what I always say, nouns, people say, well, he's tied to Palantir, he's tied to this, he's tied to that. Well, frankly, throughout most people's political evolution, they've probably been tied to a lot of things which you may deem bad. And I don't think Palantir is like the end-all label for evil in the first place. I think it's an organization which has good and bad aspects to it. But this idea of just throwing J.D. Vance to the side because of some connecto that you think he has is already a narrative which is being built up at this point. Because to my thinking, and I watched a Council on Foreign Relations seminar earlier this week, some of which I put in my Wednesday show, the elites, the British imperial run elites, which is what the Council on Foreign Relations is, they are terrified of the MAGA revolution continuing under a J.D. Vance presidency. So I think what you have among the Bush networks, the Koch networks, broader networks than that, they're just sitting there biding their time. I'm sure game plan number one is to try and sabotage the entire administration by losing the House and the Senate in 2026. But if they don't succeed in doing that, then game plan number two is to put one of their people into the Republican nomination in 2028 and try and roll back everything which has already been done. So that's what I would say about that, if Barbara wants to jump in.
I think it's not a question of 2028 so much as it is a question of 2026 at this point. I'm really focused on that from the standpoint of Promethean back. We're going to be doing a whole lot more as the new year hits and there's a countdown toward the election in terms of beginning to fight for the MAGA type of candidates and fight with the people who will be endorsed by Trump, but are definitely not MAGA, which again is where you all come into the picture. I can give you an analysis as to what will happen, which is pretty obvious if the Democrats take the House and if somehow they manage to take the Senate. Either way, you're going to see impeachment of Trump. You're going to see all of the crazy stuff, which is completely distracting of his agenda. And their main attack will be to stall things, to stall out the revolution on all fronts, which he is actually conducting. And right now, what they're focused on is basically trying to tear apart the coalition which won in 2024. Take all the stuff that the speculation around Vance and Charlie Kirk's assassination. All right. In part, don't you think that Charlie Kirk's assassination, who was a very, very good friend of J.D. Vance, in fact, J.D. Vance says that's the reason why I actually decided to run for Senate. I was convinced by Charlie to do that. That's in part a signal to J.D. Vance. You want to pursue all these policies? Well, look what happened to your friend Charlie. All right. People now are sidetracked into all sorts of nonsense without actually looking at what is actually going on here. Why was Charlie Kirk taken out? Well, Turning Point played a huge role. Whatever its problems were in the past, whatever its relationship, which was substantial to the old Republican machinery, Turning Point played a huge role in turning out the youth vote. Now we get another operation saying, oh, the youth vote is now all tied to this fascist called Nick Fuentes after Charlie's death. These are all Psywar operations designed to essentially rupture the coalition which put Trump into office. The selection of J.D. Vance as his vice president had a huge impact on the youth vote, along obviously with Bobby Kennedy's endorsement in terms of MAHA. So you look at all of these things which are put out on social media to make you doubt this person, that person, think, oh, that person is really screwed up and is not doing what I think should be done, particularly, why don't they just go and throw a rope around, James Comey or James Clapper or, William Brennan and hogtie them, okay? It's all based on, trying to get you away from your fundamental responsibility as a citizen to ensure that the revolution which the president is conducting actually wins out. And that requires you learning a whole lot about economics and physical economy and a whole lot of history very, very fast, which we here at Promethean Action and Promethean PAC are dedicated to actually using all our energies to give to people. So that's how I'd answer the question.
And Adam, that kind of begs the question of this. Thank you. Oh, and I failed to have a copy of it so I can wave it at people. But there have been some comments, including some useful ones. One was from Fire Heat Light. If Trump wants to win the midterms, he needs to reconnect politically with the disaffected Americans. There are other people saying, I'm not going to vote for a bad Republican. Well, especially in terms of that latter one. Thank you, Adam. There's our half-page flyer. It's up to you to get good Republicans. This is a very tough lift. As many of you know, I'm active in the Michigan Republican Party. I'm one of the elected leaders of the party. Let me tell you how hard it is to do two things. Find people who actually understand what Trump is doing, and then get them elected. That is very, very difficult. So here's where you have to start. You have to start actually educating the MAGA base and the broader base around what Trump's policies actually are, that this is a revolution. Now, this half-page flyer was created back in August. And we might even do a new one now that we have the new national security strategy, which kind of animates the points of this large. But people around the United States are ordering this, and you can order it down there by going to that website. They're getting 100 copies for $23. They're getting more for a little bit more, or they're just downloading a printable PDF version and printing it themselves on their little inkjet printers or going to wherever. They're taking it to social gatherings, family gatherings, gun shows, political events, party meetings, and so on. And they are educating their friends and their neighbors and strangers around what Trump's actual message is. That's the front side. And the second side of it, whoops, I guess the second side went the other way. Oh, I guess I have it in a different place. Anyway, the second side, Adam's holding it up. It just goes through the difference between Trump's policies and what we call the Uniparty, which is the Democrats and the Kochs and the Bushes and so on. So, and this does address the broader layers of the population that we have to mobilize. When it comes to 2026, we have two challenges. Number one, you have to take responsibility for figuring out how to make sure that every Republican that you know actually votes. You will be shocked how many of them do not vote in midterm elections. So we have to mobilize our own base as far as it goes. But Trump won in 2024 because he went to blue-collar workers. And I will say to all the people freaking out still about the Muslims, he won Michigan in 2024 because the Muslims and Arab Americans in Dearborn and Hamtramck voted for him and gave him so much of a margin in Wayne County, Michigan, that they couldn't steal the vote here. That's why he won Michigan. New layers, urban youth, young Black men, young Hispanic men. These are people who are not traditionally Republican voters. This is our margin for victory. And that's the point of circulating this half-page flyer. So I encourage people to get copies of it either the lovely color copy that you see here or just download the printable version of it. And please don't put a comment in the chat about how you're not going to vote for a bad Republican in the future unless you got copies of this and you at least went out and tried to create a good Republican.
Thank you, Susan. So yes, go to the link. There's a QR code above, a link there below. You can download a black and white version and you can pay us a few bucks, donate a few bucks, and you can get color copies. And again, there's no propaganda on this. We took stuff exactly directly from Trump's, what was it, Agenda 47. So we took policies that he's now putting.
This is from the Republican Party platform.
Yeah, okay, the Republican Party platform. So we literally took the Republican Party platform, took some key points out of it, and made it into a quick half-page flyer that you can use as a discussion starter. So you can check it out below or scan the QR code above. Okay, so we still have a few more minutes here. We have plenty of good questions. And in fact, I'm going to go to the next question in the list here, which continues from the question that we just took on the Republican Party. Okay. And that is on why Vance. And this is, as we've been talking about, Vance is now coming under huge attacks from all different angles, including parts of the MAGA base. Again, we get so many different angles taking questions here. This is just another kind of thing that people always want to bring up to us. Why don't you support Marco Rubio as the next president? Marco Rubio will be a much better president than J.D. Vance. I voted for Trump and will vote for Marco Rubio, will not vote for J.D. Vance. Thank you, Melita. Thank you for your question and comment. I open this up to Barbara and Susan.
Yeah, I just want to say one short thing, which is we are now 10 months into the Trump administration. It really is a little bit early for this entire discussion, and you ought to really think about why it is occurring with such fervor at this point in time. We have a huge amount of work to do ahead of the midterms and in terms of getting Trump's policies actually implemented. We have a huge educational job to do for the entire American people. I will basically quote you what President Trump says about both Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance. He basically said that J.D. is the obvious candidate and Marco will be the obvious vice president. Then he said something which I think is really true. You never know until somebody is really tested. All right. How many people of anybody you might consider for 2026 or 2028 would say what Donald Trump said about Marjorie Taylor Greene? All right. That kind of breaks the whole way that politics is played because Trump consistently plays outside the box. Right now, he's saying who's loyal to my policies and who has the balls and the guts to actually get them implemented. That's his test. And how much do they actually play outside the box of traditional politics? That's the test which the American people, I think, are actually going to be looking at in 2028. But to even get to 2028, we have to get through 2026, and we've got to do and we have to begin to impose the will of the people on the current Senate and House in terms of Trump's policies to test every single one of these candidates. Again, I tell you that the only reason
Barbara, you accidentally muted yourself there about 30 seconds ago.
I think that the only reason why the present Republican Party in the House and the Senate did anything in terms of Trump's agenda was because of the overwhelming election result in 2024, which scared the hell out of them. And that's what we have to deliver in terms of the midterms. And that's a big job. So I'm not really thinking all that much about 2028. I think it's critical that you actually have a tested candidate who actually can replicate what it is that Trump has done in terms of those qualities to carry forth this agenda. But that candidate is going to be tested right now in terms of what's going on. And the oligarchy's basic freak out is obvious. They don't want any more Trumps after the Trump first term, period. And that's what the attacks on JD are all about.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Quick shout outs here to our wonderful and amazing audience. JW, thank you very much. Donald Trump needs to use some of his war chest to fund y'all. We agree. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you for tuning in. Please make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Longtime supporter DG, thank you very much for tuning in. Anyway, the Promethean team can team up with TPUSA to do a few live events, either live or zoomed in somehow. We haven't heard anything from them. We haven't really reached out. If somebody out there is in with their networks and can put us in touch with somebody, please. I'm sure Barbara and Susan would love to speak to TPUSA's audience about our angle in the world. So yeah, we agree. We'd love to be on these shows. It's just, it takes time to get to, speak to the right producer and figure out where we can fit in with their activities. So thank you very much, DG. And Dane, thank you very much for the $50 super sticker. Thank you for joining us in the shows. I think I've seen your name here before. Thank you very much for joining us. Please make sure you get our free newsletter if you haven't yet already. Okay, are there any particular topics you ladies want to take up next? We have one. How about this? Let's take one really quickly on somebody asking about this paper ballots. Thank you, Lisa, for this question or comment. What we can do as citizens to push for 1 day, 1 vote, paper watermarked ballots hand count. I have done it for MCRC Republicans and AZ GOP, smaller precincts. We hand counted about 1,200 ballots in 1 hour and 9 minutes, 100% accuracy. Thank you, Lisa, for your question or comment. I agree. If it were up to me, if I were in charge of the whole thing, I'd say everyone's going to use paper ballots. The specifications will be left up. But I think paper ballots is really the most secure way to have an election. Barbara, Susan, any comments?
Susan, that's for you.
All right. Well, obviously they would be preferred. There's no question about it. They're done in Europe. Believe it or not, they're done in European countries. They're done in Mideastern countries, and they get the results the same night. So there's no legitimate argument against them. The question really is a question of political power. The responsibility for methods and means and places of elections lies with the states under the U.S. Constitution. So it really is an issue. Here in Michigan, unfortunately, we passed a hideous constitutional amendment, one of these ballot initiatives 2 years ago, where our ability to do anything like that is actually precluded by the Michigan Constitution, which means we'd have to repeal that amendment, which I hope someday we do. It may not be quite that bad in other states, but you actually have to have control of your legislature, your state government, or in some cases your county or your local parties or your local jurisdictions and so on to do it. So it's not like we can just decree it. I know Donald Trump wants it for absolutely proper reasons, but it's really a question of political power and, how many people are out there engaged at the local level to do the kinds of things that have been done in a few places, as you mentioned, Lisa. So thank God they've been done in a few places. I think, was it Dallas just announced same-day paper ballots? I believe. I might be wrong. But again, you got to fight these things out jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And I will come back to my usual rant on this. Despite machines, Donald Trump won in 2024. So your first strategy has to be, how do we overwhelm them politically so that they can't get away with any capabilities that they still might have?
Thank you very much, Barbara and Susan. Quick shout out to Paul Trainer. Thank you very much, our brother from the other side of the pond there. I think you joined us a little bit late today. Thank you for showing up, and Merry Christmas to you and everyone else in the chat. Thank you very much. I just realized, yes, Christmas is literally 2 weeks away from today. So yes, Merry Christmas, everyone. Okay, we still have plenty of great questions here. I'm going to take an interesting one, which definitely will lean into a little bit of our history. And I think it's a very good history. Okay. Ken, so this next question is from Ken. Are you three acquainted with The Limits to Growth, published in 1972? Club of Rome via the World Economic Forum and MIT. Ken, if you're watching this, yes, our organization is very acquainted, the longer historical arc of our history, the lore of our organization. We are very acquainted with the 1972 Limits to Growth. It reads like a globalist manifesto, correct? There is even a section entitled Build Back Better. I had no idea about that. Ring a bell? This is proof that the left's plans are premeditated for at least, I don't know how many decades, since the end of World War II, for sure. Also, wouldn't it be better for America if we normalized with Russia and left the UN? Knowing the left, their collective unqualified heads would pop. I think the US alliances are way overdue, and we should isolate from all the takers whose sole existence depends on grifting off the good nature of Americans. I love you guys. You are the most knowledgeable show of all. Thank you for educating me. Thank you for raising this. I'm gonna open this up to Susan and Barbara, but what you described here, you're already on a good track to understanding some of the longer term forces that are actually in play right now. So Barbara and Susan.
Well, I was actually looking in my bookshelf here for the book we wrote about this, called There Are No Limits to Growth, to be able to show you. It is one of the best books, I think, that, in our former incarnation as associates of Lyndon LaRouche. In fact, Lyndon LaRouche wrote most of the book himself. There are no limits to growth, a really fundamental attack on what you're talking about as the globalist manifesto. There it is. Susan's got it. All right. And that's very early on in our existence in our former iteration. I need to say here, for legal reasons, we have no association with Helga Zepp-LaRouche or any of her entities. But at any rate, you're right on track. And Susan may want to add to that.
Well, I'll just add from very early on, we were in mortal combat with the entire development of this entire environmentalist, mankind is a pox on the planet, Mother Earth, uber alles, and so on, all of which comes directly out of the British imperial elite. And precisely the same networks at the turn of the century who pushed the environmentalist movement were the same networks, especially again from British think tanks and the royal family, who pushed eugenics, who gave the kind of playbook to Adolf Hitler. Obviously, at a certain point, Hitler wasn't playing by the rules they intended for him to play by, but he was a creation ideologically of precisely the idea, which gets to a very fundamental principle, which is that man is no better than an animal, and therefore we have a carrying capacity. We can't change our relationship to nature, and so like a herd of cattle. If you have too many cattle and not enough land to graze on, then some people are going to die. That's the underlying philosophy of all of this, that man does not have the ability to improve his relationship to nature. So we had a lot of fun back in the 70s confronting the early spokesman for this green movement. And it certainly has metastasized. These ideas have infected our education system. They've infected our culture as well. And yes, it does come from the WEF and MIT, but it actually goes back a little bit further. And we actually, in the past, have written quite a bit in terms of where this movement comes from. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, we have some pamphlets that we might be able to make available to people if we still have them in some kind of digital form that give you the background in terms of this, in terms of where this environmentalist movement came from.
Thank you. And a quick shout out to Amy here, who basically wants us to talk a little bit more about the green issue greater. Thank you, Amy, for your support. We really appreciate it. Can we address Trump's green news scam he keeps speaking of? I have read Mr. LaRouche's expose on climate change by Prince Philip. So why can't he tell the truth as most others believe is a lie? Thank you, Amy, for your question. So the green news scam, can we address that a little bit more? I think maybe this is partially what Jamie Dimon's JPMorgan Chase's new initiative is designed to kind of bring back into the forefront.
Well, I'm not sure on the surface that it is, because I actually looked at it, and compared to what they were going to invest in under Biden, which was a lot of the green stuff, Dimon is sort of pivoting to Trump's new world. But I think Trump is just, he attacking the green news scam. When you listen to him, he does address some of the fundamental physical questions of what's wrong with these insane things like windmills and solar and so on. They're political weapons by a zero anti-growth crowd, because the economic impact of all of these things is negative. More goes into the production of more energy goes into the production of a windmill or a bunch of solar panels than you're ever going to get out. I mean, the only reason these things have proliferated is because of subsidies. And Trump is very clear. They don't work, they're ugly, and we're not paying for them any longer. So, I think he's hit at some of the fundamental points, but I think to really begin to, I'll use the word deprogram people in terms of environmentalism, you really do have to get to the fundamental question of what is the image of man. And that's where I think you can really begin to extricate people. Do you really think that we're no better than your pet dog? Now, some people may, and we all love the corgis. Okay, let me make my disclaimer right now. But as much as Barbara loves her corgi, I don't think she thinks her corgi is on the same intellectual level as she is, or spiritual.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Susan, and thank you, Amy, for your support. Thank you for joining us every week. And also a quick shout out. I don't believe I've seen you here in the chat before, but thank you for tuning in. Lancastrian, thank you for your support from across the pond. Please make sure you're subscribed to our free newsletter and our YouTube channel. We do 3 political updates a week, and we do this 1 live broadcast. So thank you very much, Lancastrian, for your support. Okay, next question that I'm going to take is a very inspirational one. And thank you, Bridget, for this question. I am teaching world history to my high school co-op class this year, which will include the world wars and modern history. Do you provide resources explained at a high school level? What topics would you say are most vital to cover? We are using Master Books World History with the option to add in curriculum with outside resources. I would love any advice, as I have learned so much recently watching your updates, but I am still new to the topics you cover. Thank you and God bless. Bridget, thank you for your question and comments. I know I could say a few things, but Barbara and Susan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the critical overall thing that you have to bring into the discussion is this issue of the fact that the British Empire never went away, and that the opposition to the British Empire takes the form of the American political system and the American system of political economy. Because so much of what has been presented, especially over the last 120 years or so, just erases that reality and presents it as, well, this country happened to get in a fight with that country over this, or it's communism versus capitalism, or in the post-Cold War period, we repackaged it as authoritarian countries against the democracies. So the history of imperialism, and in the modern period, British imperialism, which has not gone away, it's just repackaged itself, I think is fundamental. Now, on our toolkit page, maybe Adam can pull that up, we highlight a number of our own authors who have written extensively in this. Robert Ingram has written maybe as many as a dozen books, I haven't kept track, on the Anglo-American Empire, national banking, wonderful books on Lincoln, on McKinley, on Washington, on Hamilton. Those are tremendous resources. One of our friends, William Wirtz, has written an excellent book, which I think is a good place to start, called Beware the British East India Company. And Barbara and I are both very fond of Richard Poe's book, How the British Created Communism and Blamed It on the Jews, which is a very accessible, short, relatively short history of the 19th and the 20th century. So those are a few places that I would start. We wish we had the resources to actually develop a more thorough curriculum, because I think people are very hungry for it. And, you know, it's something that we will think about. I don't know if Barbara wants to add something.
Yeah, the fundamental thing, I think Susan hits at it. You've got to actually look at history as a kind of state of permanent warfare over two images of man. One is that the image of man that the empires always had, or the imperial empires always had, which is man is no better than an animal. The other is what we like to call the Promethean tendency in history, which starts with Plato, moves through the Renaissance, involves fundamental scientific discovery and human advances. And you have to ask the question, what forms of society have actually advanced humanity in terms of the level of wealth of populations and the ability of populations to actually expand at a consistent level. And that gives you a total appreciation of the American Revolution, which is, if I were being remedial about world history at this point in terms of teaching it in the United States, I would say the very first thing I'd start with is a really good view of our own history. No, we were not, you know, slaveholders who came over here with the specific idea to engage in the slave trade and steal all of the Indians' land. That's just completely insane. It is our 250th anniversary this year, and we really need to go back and look at the remarkable American Revolution, which changed all of human history. And most of what's happened after the American Revolution is an attack by the empires to keep it from spreading in any form to the rest of the world. So that's how I think about it. And we've got a lot of stuff in the toolkit, but there's a lot of work which we really need to expand and do to really fill out for people what I just told you.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Susan.
By the way,
Bridget,
let me
yes.
make a comment. Go to the toolkit tab on Promethean Action, and please do your Christmas shopping there. Thank you.
Yes, everyone. I'm sorry, I didn't have the URL shortened in preparation. I'll do that for next week. But if you just search the web for Promethean Action Toolkit, you'll find the page on our website. We have good SEO. It should be the first thing. And on that page, we're going to have a list of resources and books from our authors that you can check out for more history. Bridget, I want to say, if you're watching this, please get in contact with us by email. Let us know that you sent us the question, and we can get you some we can try to get you some resources that will definitely help your class there. Thank you very much for the question. And I'd like to give everyone, before we end today's show, I'd like to thank everyone in the chat. I know it was tense there for a few minutes on a few topics, but thank you everyone for keeping it civil. Thank you everyone for joining us. Christmas is in 2 weeks. I really hope everyone spends some good time with their friends and their family this holiday season. Barbara and Susan, any last closing words for our network here on YouTube and X?
Well, I would just say that the last question is really important, because when you understand the nature of this conflict between these two images of man, which have taken the form of the American system versus the British system in the last several centuries, and then go back to what we began with, Trump's national security strategy, I think you will have a deeper appreciation of just how important that is. And again, I encourage people to read it. The president and his team are actually bringing you into the process of policymaking. That's extremely important. That's what it means to be a citizen of a great republic. You have to be involved in policymaking, understand why they're making these decisions. And this document is written for precisely that purpose. So I will just conclude by encouraging people to, again, take that national security strategy and read it and share it.
Thank you, Susan.
Well, I thought that was Christmas when I read it last Thursday. That was the greatest Christmas present I think I could have had. And so I would encourage you, just as Susan did, because I think that's what it is. And we've got to basically ensure that it remains the national security policy of the United States. So I'll leave it at that for today. And, thanks a lot for listening.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Get our free newsletter. Stay subscribed to the channel. And thank you very much.